Hi, I'm your host Satwan, and welcome to this episode with Jonathan Tomek from Digital Element. If you'd like to listen to the audio-only version of this podcast, you can find the Payments Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favourite podcast app. You can also listen on the web. Type thepayments.show into your web browser and you'll get a list of all the episodes. Lastly, if you would like a PDF transcript of this episode, please visit thepaymentsshow.substack.com. Thanks and enjoy the episode. Jonathan, welcome to the Payment Show.
Thank you for having me.
So Jonathan, you are the Vice President of Research and Development at Digital Elements, which is based in Georgia in the USA. And yes. Digital Element is a company that helps businesses to understand more insights about their customers through their internet connection at a very basic level. And before we talk about that in more detail, I'm just going to give the audience a bit of your background. So you're an expert, you're an information security expert. Your background is in threat intelligence, network forensics, malware analysis, and the whole gamut by the looks of things. You've had roles from everything as a security person at the US Marine Corps. You've had multiple threat intelligence roles, and you've even founded your own hacking conference called THOTCON. So obviously a very highly technically capable person. So I'm sure you've got some excellent war stories based on your career before we even begin, I think.
Oh, there's a lot. Yes, for sure. But well, we can go into a lot of different things as you want to, but yes, it's been an adventurous time.
Sure. I always like to start off with an interesting stat. So worldwide, it's estimated that 1.6 billion people use VPNs. And I mean, I never estimated how many people use VPNs, but that's a lot higher than I would have guessed anyway. So I want to really start the conversation off to say, well, how is that relevant to somebody running an e-commerce store and what you guys do in the security space?
Sure. So I'm going to say that even though that 1.6 billion use that, it's not every single day because it's such a variety, and that's just a really good estimate. The fraud market's even higher. Like their percentages go much, much higher. But for what it's worth and why this is even relevant in sense of e-commerce is, and we've seen this explicitly, especially in the airline industry, that you can purchase cheaper tickets based upon where you're located. You could even get different items bought in like a different country because you're able to get and circumvent different types of taxes if you can forge your location. So it can actually have business implications if you consider that too, because if you're going back to like the airline concept, if somebody is able to circumvent and start getting $100 off tickets and they do this all the time and other people catch on, this could start developing to a bigger problem over time.
Sure. And then obviously that affects the tax revenues and sales taxes around the world as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks for that background. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about in this space around why a customer's location is so critical. At the very basic level, if you're just on the internet and you connect to a website, that website provider can have some kind of add-on or software that says where that person's from. And then obviously a VPN, you can set your location to wherever you want. So my next question would be, okay, so if you know that they're not from there, how on earth do you figure that out, and what other information do you look at to provide the business owner with what they need to know to whether to conduct that transaction or not?
Great question. So based upon what you're saying, which is how do we figure out that somebody's using a VPN to circumvent restrictions? So one of those methods that we do is we actually just use the VPN. We figure out how these providers are offering their services and what services they offer. Because not every VPN is nefarious, for that matter of speaking. Not everybody's going to use it for fraud, etc. But a lot of people use it because they want to circumvent geo restrictions. So that's the number one thing. We leverage and find as many different type of providers that exist out there so that we can actually monitor and see what's happening. So if we want to say, we're going to use VPN A, and they allow you to come out very specifically in the center of London, which is an interesting element there too, because it lets you get very, very precise in locations for some of them. So we'll check that out. And then we will dig into a little bit about like who are they offering these services to? What are they trying to figure out? And then also what different regions they're allowing it to. So it's all about figuring out what the big package is of these offerings. Our goal is to figure out what I'm going to call it the integrity of an IP address, so that we make sure that we're helping users rather than hindering them. Because believe it or not, a lot more people as time goes on that use these services don't really realize that they're actually hurting themselves over time when it comes to leveraging some of the services.
Yeah, okay. Really interesting point that part of your solution addresses is non-human traffic. So it'd be great if you can dig into that, because I briefly read about things like proxies and Darknet. So it'd be great for you to explain what that's about.
Right. And so I apologize if I go down that rabbit hole a lot, because that's something that I'm very passionate about, because I like making sure the internet's a safe place, of course. So the proxy part and the VPN part they kind of go hand in hand. And what really matters to this whole ordeal is that's where I'm going to say a vast majority of all your fraud is going to come from. We're talking about credit card transactions that are trying to buy fraudulent things, etc. But there's so many of them, which is why it's become such a hot problem in the entire community, because as soon as something is tested, they can go to the next one, the next one, next one. And so it's a big topic. So I think we can probably dig into that more if you had good questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, I had some hope when virtual credit cards came into the mainstream, and I thought, oh, this is great. You can have a separate number for your online purchases and what have you. But I noticed for the first time personally, when I tried to buy some software earlier this year, actually no, it was a newsletter subscription. The virtual card was not allowed by, and I don't think the person who I was buying the newsletter from even knew this, because they had a hosting provider that allows them to sell their PDFs or whatever. I think that the way they had implemented Stripe was that you can't use virtual cards.
Right.
So yeah, it seems that even if there are solutions, there's challenges with those as well.
Absolutely. It is. It's hard to know, because it's basically chaining of the events of different types of fraud. It's somebody could leverage a gift card and then bring that to Stripe, or buy a virtual card and then bring that, and it just starts adding up, and then you have this entire flow of fraud. That's why they basically went this draconian approach and cut it right down the line, which also limits your user base, believe it or not, because a lot of virtual cards are coming out now.
Yeah, I thought they were fantastic, and now I've had to flip back to using the plastic card, which makes me nervous online.
Yeah.
One part of your solution around additional IP insights. So we know we're talking about location and trying to figure out where this person is, but let's talk about the intricacies about that. So things like mobile carrier databases, you've got things like demographics you can determine, the longitude and latitude. There's so many different areas. It'd be great for you to maybe pick on one or two which are really great for e-commerce businesses as an example.
Sure. So it's a great question, because we have a lot of different types of data within our data sets that can be very valuable to people. Like you said, the demographic data, which could be something of interest to some people for sure. But when it comes to just the regions, I think that's probably one of the more important things, because you want to know what your target audience is. And then with that, it's being able to say, hey, which a lot of people know how the ad market works. You say, hey, I want this to go to all of the UK. This is specific. But what if you wanted it to be in even more specific areas, and then add additional types of context to it? Because you might care about it being in the UK, but what if you only cared about it for being somebody that had a specific, like a new mother, for example, even though that's something that we wouldn't necessarily have that data, but what if that was something you were interested in? Some of the demographics would also be able to present that to you, to give you a little bit more insight, or even prevent somebody from forging those requests to say, hey, I know that this is where all the money is. I'm going to funnel it right through this one spot. There's a lot of different unique insights that can be driven from just the IP addresses alone.
Yeah, I did see that a couple of the key benefits of businesses of your solutions are localized content and targeted advertising, along with things like digital rights management, and analytics. And you've also mentioned that you've got a new data set called IPC. I'm not sure what that stands for, but it's sort of the next level of your data set from what I can understand. Maybe you can perhaps expand on that?
It's an additional insight, and it's what we're calling IP characteristics. And basically what it's doing is watching how IP addresses evolve over time. So, for example, if your IP address is where you're saying it is right today, but what happens if it changes every day, all the time? You're not going to necessarily have the correct insight into that, because nothing's static on the internet. Everything changes very dramatically. But with how we're collecting our data, we can say, wow, this IP address has been a school for this duration of time. If we see different types of actions coming from it, meaning like we can definitely say that this is the company, this is the business, this is, like I said, if we could figure out it was a school, you could probably say this, and this is static. That's great. But what happens if you saw the opposite side, which is an IP address that just constantly is bouncing around? You're not going to necessarily know that that is a valuable, like it could be potentially used for different types of fraud, but maybe not. Maybe it's just, it doesn't give you the exact characteristics that you'd be looking for. So we can find that, and that's what's really cool, is knowing, wow, look at how vast stuff changes, and then what data can you apply to it to give confidence in the data you're gleaning from it.
So in that scenario, I'm trying to think, why would an IP address legitimately change very often if it's not nefarious? So Tor, in case somebody listening doesn't know, that's a browser where you can browse anonymously, I think. But I don't know about how the IP addresses work there. I think they change every day, like you mentioned. But is there a legitimate case for that?
So what's funny, I'm actually going to say it's the opposite of what you just said. So Tor doesn't really change frequently.
Oh,
because I know that, and this is really fun to talk about, because what Tor was designed to do is allow people to just be completely anonymous on the internet. So that when you're leveraging the network, and if you go outbound through it, like Tor has an inside network too. That's what we call the Darknet. That's when you hear like the scary things in the world, the dark web. It's usually people referring to stuff with inside of Tor. But Tor also allows you to go through and exit. It's practically impossible for most people to even figure out who is using and coming out of Tor, unless you know the Tor IP addresses. So that's why often businesses block them, because there will be attackers that use it and leverage that network. Even though those, I'm going to call them more semi-static, which they don't change too frequently. But what I'm talking about when I'm saying the IP addresses can frequently jump and move, it's oftentimes going to be, I'm going to say, probably more residential type of IP addresses, like, for example, people's homes. So if you reboot your home router, you're more than likely going to have a brand new IP address. I know that sounds funny, but it doesn't mean it's fraudulent. It doesn't mean it's nefarious. But what it can do, though, is it changes up how that demographic data is. But it also gives you a window of where the IP address range could be. Some IP addresses only stay within, like, the UK. But what happens if that IP address shifted to every different country around the world? That's some of the insights that we can give you, which is, wow, that IP address is something like we should block probably pretty soon. We're keeping track of all of those things, because if you wanted to block all traffic from a country, like say that we didn't want to see anything from Russia, hypothetically, right? If an IP address that was in the UK now is in Russia and your list did not include that IP address in the Russian thing, you're now allowing it. See how that works? It gets complicated, but it's actually a really big problem for some people.
Okay, that's really insightful. If we look at the companies that you serve right now in terms of your customers, it's quite a broad range. You've got advertising, broadcasting, financial services, social media platforms, online gambling. So I wanted to ask you two parts to a question. So are all sizes of business, small, medium and large, and enterprise businesses using your software? And the second part to the question is, there's so many types of fraud, card fraud, phishing, state sponsored. There's so many types. And if certain ones of those are clustered with different sizes of business.
So the first part of your question, which was what kind of business is leveraging our data? It is a variety. I will definitely say small to medium businesses are, and very large businesses. But everybody uses our data differently, which I think is what's really powerful. That I like to say that we are a perfect complement for many different types of data sets because it's context. We're delivering something that any kind of platform can leverage, whether it's the geo parts of it, whether it's the integrity of the VP, if it's a VPN or a proxy, and it could be used by different parts of the organizations, which is why I believe a lot of people can use us. Not that I'm trying to pitch our company at all, but it's actually a crucial part of a business. And like when you think of the fraud departments, if they are trying to investigate a string of types of fraudulent activity, it helps to know where some of that's coming from. Not only to know, like, hey, let's cluster this piece of data, they could glean that from our data set. But also it helps you with the targeted advertising. It also helps you with other types of analytics that people probably don't even think about. So it's a good variety of businesses that use us for sure.
And for the smaller businesses, are they using your solution indirectly? So, for example, if they have a Shopify store, okay, that's a small business, but Shopify is a huge business. Is that how that typically works, or do they come to you if they need help?
So a company would be using our data, so Shopify would be using our data to help them with their side. And so indirectly, I would say that most people around the world are probably using our data without ever even realizing on a day-to-day event. But yes, Shopify would be the primary user here to help them with knowing what kind of data insights they would need. But in addition, like if a customer was using it, they potentially could say, hey, Shopify is saying I'm over here. Why is that the case? It's probably because they're not using our data then. But anyway, it's a lot of people can use it in different ways. So,
yeah. Well, I'd imagine it's a very rich data set because your company's been going since 1999. And I think I first used the internet would have been around 94, I think. I think it was in Florida, if I remember. My parents took us all to Disney World. And I think in Epcot, they were showing the internet. I think it was AOL. I think they'd set up some PCs. So, geez, that's a long time ago.
That's
and I was just amazed. I was hooked from that point. So there's a very long history you've got there.
Yeah. I actually started with the internet very early, just like you have. I grew up with it because my mother got very early into the big e-commerce space, the .com boom. But yeah, so that started me down that path because it's a lot of fun. The internet's a huge thing, and it literally tied everything together. And it's actually kind of fun knowing how so many people said it would only be very short-lived. And now look at it, tied everything together.
Yeah, absolutely. So based on that, I guess you operate in countries all over the world in terms of your offices and where your staff are, or is it concentrated in North America?
We're primarily concentrated in North America in several different places, but our headquarters is in Atlanta, Georgia, for sure. Yep. We do have offices around the world for sure, too. I think the beauty of our business, though, is we're agnostic. Like, it doesn't matter where we're located because we do the entire globe.
Great stuff. I want to move into talking about your solution. It's kind of split into three major parts. So you've got something called net acuity, which is for your location targeting. You've got threat intelligence, which covers the proxy and VPN that you mentioned earlier. And then you've got like another banner, which covers additional IP insights. So those are the main three areas. And it'd be good to know when a company engages with you, first of all, how does that happen, and what does the length of that engagement look like before they typically go live with your solution? And what kind of setup do you typically have for customers, or is it very customized?
So that's a big, broad question because we like to work with the customers the way that they need it to. And based upon the solutions that they're going to need. I mean, we like to give everybody a bit of everything because for what it's worth, this is why I like to call it more of that IP integrity concept. It's that insight of the data, because not just that the geographic region matters, but what happens if you're located very specifically in the US and you only care about US centric things. But if customers are leveraging VPNs and proxies and forging their location, that would also affect you as well. So it's kind of a what fits you and what do you need sort of solution. So, and we can explain how all the different use cases would apply to you, because when it comes to like DRM use cases, right, or advertising, there's so many different use cases. So we would definitely be able to explain how that all works. That's a crucial part of it too. But the second part, sorry, can you fill me in? What was the second part of your question? Just because I want to make sure I answer correctly.
Yeah, you've got 3 main areas of your solution. How long does it typically take to implement with a customer?
So that's a great question too, because we have different types of methods for customers to integrate with our product really quickly. So we have a RESTful API, like the technical terms that I could probably leave out of here, but we offer different methods for any kind of customer to leverage really quickly. And it shouldn't take too long. I mean, we've been doing this for many years, of course. So any customer that comes to us, we get them up pretty quickly.
Yep. One thing I wanted to ask, a relatively straightforward way that businesses can determine where you are, if you're going to buy something. And I saw this when I first set up a side hustle a few years back. I had to open a Stripe account. And one of the things you have to do in there is set up various levels of checks that you can choose. So for example, it would ask you, do you really want to check the billing address, or you're not that bothered? And there was various levels higher than that as well. Do you want them to verify with an SMS? Or there was different levels. So could businesses just save themselves a lot of headache if they simply knew, because I'm assuming they don't, if they simply knew that they could do these kinds of things? And one example that comes to mind is selling cannabis in the States, because states have different rules versus federal rules. That's one straightforward way where you could say, well, anyone around the world can check out our store, but when they come to buy, we have to have the strictest payment checks.
Absolutely. There's a lot of reasons for why you would want to have a lot more checks. I mean, letting anybody visit a site, I would say, is probably not as big of an issue, because there's even research and people that need to have access to things like that. But you brought up a good point, which is having additional checks, because let's hypothetically say that you are going to go purchase cannabis in the UK and you wanted to send it to you. That obviously there's legality associated with that. Even in the US, we have that across different states. Like, you cannot buy it in certain states. But if you allowed it as a business, you now potentially could have repercussions yourself, because you now did something that you shouldn't have done. So your hand is kind of forced. But what happens if somebody was able to circumvent certain restrictions and they said, hey, I can buy it because I am in the exact location, I have the right information to look like I'm in the spot that's allowing it, right? You used a VPN, you had the right geo IP address, all these things, but then the mailing address was totally different. You now also would have a different level of, well, what do I do? This could also affect tariffs. This could affect different types of taxes, because you now gave a product from, whether it's illegal or not, let's say it was something that wasn't illegal, you now are sending a product to a different country that's going to now be taxed at a higher rate, and you gave it to them for a lower, so you ended up losing money on the whole business, on the transaction.
Okay, see why it's a minefield now.
Yes, it is a big problem.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why some of the cannabis shops in the States, I think they deal with a lot of cash, because it just makes it easier if you have to be there physically.
Yep, that is correct.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, is there anything important that you wanted to get across in terms of the sales side and helping businesses convert more easily, that maybe I've missed something important that you want to get across?
If I had to say anything, the integration piece is probably the most intimidating part for a lot of businesses, to make sure that they're up and running and utilizing the data properly. But I can say that I would like to bring comfort to people if they ever wanted to try it, that it's actually a really simple thing to do. And then we can also show you how granular some of these things can happen, or the data is, which also is another really crucial element to this, because I like to say our accuracy is incredibly high, but we also offer another kind of dimension that if somebody was looking into it, which is that granularity down to like postal codes, because some people care about that. So yeah, it can be intimidating, but just the offering itself, it's really cool.
Yeah. So your website for anyone listening is digitalelement.com in case anybody wants to check out those solutions. So we'll move on to talk about some topical things, I think. Predictions for 2024. Your company has highlighted the CTV space, and I didn't know this stood for connected TV. What's going on there? Why is it going to be a big trend for this year?
Wow. So in the CTV space, because that is a big thing that's coming up right now. Everybody has a connected television now, whether you know it or not. And if you think about it, whenever you go to a restaurant, half of those televisions are all connected to the internet. Even your one, it's all smart devices, IoT devices for that matter speaking. But when it comes to all of the different types of trends, that's also where some of the fraud is also coming from, because there's so many new types of devices coming online. I mean, we're talking, how many would you have expected to have in your home? Probably 20, 30 different types of internet connected devices in your house without even like knowing about it.
Definitely not.
Yeah, it's a big thing. So that's why and in addition to that, not many people even update those devices. So that's why there's going to be a really big push to combat a lot of the fraud that's behind that and securing some of those devices. But the ad fraud behind the CTV stuff is just so big. That's where a lot of bots are now coming from. And to give you an understanding why, yes, people use a smart web browser on their television, but you're not going to be doing a lot of your internet traffic on a TV. It's not an easy thing to do. You have a computer for all those purposes. But a lot of these televisions are now or not just televisions in general, but just like the connected devices in general, are being used to pivot and whether it's the IP address themselves of that device or the device, it's being used to create internet traffic, and actors are leveraging them. I could have probably said that a little better, but it's a big thing.
So I'm just trying to set the scene simply for the TV example. So it would be somebody trying to screw over a competitor and drain their funds. Is that right?
That could be an absolutely a use case. Yes, for sure. That's one of the many. But the biggest part about it is the fact that there are so many devices around the world that all of those could look like they're unique people. So what would you, here, let me throw this question at you, because this is probably one that's good for the audience. What do you think you'd be able to do if you had 100 million IP addresses and you could look like you're a unique person, 100 million people around the world? What could you do? That's a really good story, and that's what we're trying to help prevent and also figure out so that people have comfort.
I didn't think to that second level. I've only thought about devices in my house on the first level. So I bought a dishwasher a few years ago, a Bosch one, and it was an internet connected dishwasher. And I thought, what could this thing possibly do? So I don't like putting IoT devices on my home network, but I connected it just to see what it would do. Sure. And all it does is when the dishwasher program's finished, the app tells you that it's finished. So I didn't think that was a worthwhile security risk to have that thing on the home network.
It's not for a lot of people. That's not you have a firewall that's protecting it. You are very secure. And I'm sure within the past day or two, or you're going to hear it within the next week, that you heard there's 3 million smart toothbrushes out there doing distributed denial of service attacks around the world. That's not a real thing. I'm just going to straight up tell you that. It's very safe. There is a what if, because the powerful part and why this can be more concerning is it's not necessarily the appliance. I mean, yes, you should always update everything whenever you can. And yes, you can feel safe to plug these things in. It's the people that will like to buy some technology that's so smart that they're not going to use it and never update it. And then now it becomes a potential vulnerability because it's usually going to be like the app on your phone that you have, because your phone is also part of this, of the internet connected devices. And then you also start installing additional plugins on your like set-top boxes. You can't really do that with a smart dishwasher, so feel a little bit more comfortable there. But your smart refrigerator that you can do it to, that's a little bit different. So that's to give you a little bit more insight into the challenges.
Right. Okay. That's some really important context. Okay. Thank you. And just a few of the other, to finish up on current threats. Mm-hmm. Nation states, China, there was an article recently that the US government's disrupting a botnet from a hacking group there, mm-hmm. and that's attacking US infrastructure like power plants. And then Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard Enterprises has been attacked recently. So nation-state style attacks are happening all the time now. And only a small, tiny fraction make it into the news.
Absolutely. And sometimes they're, whether or not they're bigger or smaller than they really are, it's very hard to gauge because the attack interface, like what you're looking at, you have to really tie all that data together, and it can be very difficult. But all of these things are tied together because what nation states are doing is not much different than what the cyber criminals are doing. That's why I bring up the proxy part, because there are a tremendous amount of, in this case, like whether it's the set-top boxes, which could be used for fraud, proxies, which are compromised home routers, which it's always a good thing every week or two, just reboot your home router, because that will get rid of any risks that you might have. Believe it or not, it's kind of a funny little thing that people don't think about, or just updating your web browser. But when you have millions upon millions of these connected, always-on devices that can be used by attackers, that's why these risks are getting bigger, because we already know a lot of if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, acts like a duck, it's probably a duck. The bad guys know the same thing. So they're going to do everything in their power to start looking and acting and talking. It's about time now that we started adding additional levels of context, which would be, hey, maybe we need a DNA check at this point. But I don't know. I'm not saying going down the rabbit hole, but adding additional context to what you already have, which could then say, oh, wait a minute. Not only is that, it looks like a duck, but for whatever reason, that doesn't smell any bit like a duck. Why is that? That's not a big deal. Proxies are a huge part of this factor, because at any given time of the day, and this is something really important that we do, because there's a lot of different types of services out there that say, hey, we block proxies, or we can tell you what they are. We actually go really deep into discerning the difference between different types of proxies by giving you not just the name, but like what services they even offer. If this is of interest to you, like it might not be of interest to a bunch of people, but to the fraud teams, it can be huge. But in addition to that, we also do timestamps, which is massive, because just because it's a proxy today doesn't mean it'll be a proxy tomorrow, doesn't mean it was a proxy 2 weeks ago, and doesn't mean the proxy from 2 weeks ago is relevant today. So we offer all of that and make it really to help you discern what's good and bad. So
yeah, that's the key, because I used to work at AWS, and there were great tools in the platform that companies could use to set up alerts, but then third-party software companies started popping up to say, here's a dashboard, because it's overwhelming, because it alerts you to everything that could possibly be wrong, which is overwhelming to anyone. So you guys have dashboards and things to make it more consumable.
We integrate with all of them. That's what makes us really powerful, so that you have less. Because that's the number one thing right now, where the goal is to reduce your costs and not increment your costs. Yeah. I always think, especially your time. Time is your number one thing, because there's 1,000,001 alerts that exist out there. But if we integrate with any of the tools that you already have, then now it's a time saver, which is big. At least it's big in my book. And then if it helps you make a decision more rapidly, that's also another time saver. So that's why I like to call it the win-win solutions when you start incrementing that way.
Yeah. I did want to finish on that, actually, is the costs of your solution. How do you charge? What's your sort of business model? And just from a selfish point of view, I love investing. So are you a public company?
Well, we're a private company right now, but at least to my knowledge, I don't know what the plan is. I know we definitely do annual licensing, and that's always going to give you your best savings, etc. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Good stuff.
Buy us for 10 years and you have the best pricing ever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, excellent. Well, thanks so much for that. That was so insightful. I know this conversation could go on for another 5 hours, but I just wanted to make sure that I touched on various points lightly for the audience. In case they want to dig deeper, they can go to your website, which again is digitalelement.com. And I love to finish the show with 1 or 2 light questions.
Sure.
So with you, I'm going to ask you for your favorite movie, I think, today.
Ooh, favorite movie. Okay. So we were talking a lot about fraud, or just the craziness of what the money markets are. I think, have you ever seen The Usual Suspects?
Yes.
I
have an interesting story about that. The first time I watched it, I was quite young and I hated it. And I was quite tired. I don't even think I got in more than a quarter of the way through it. And then I watched it about 5 years ago and thought it was one of the best movies ever made.
It's one of those movies that you're expecting, you want to know the outcome, and then it just twists, and that's one of my favorites. I have to say. Yeah.
You maybe want to watch it again now. I think I might watch it this weekend.
It's such a good one. We both do it together. We'll keep each other accountable.
Yep, I like it. Excellent stuff. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, Jonathan. And I think very lastly, it would be good to mention, if people want to meet your company, Digital Element, and maybe you might even want to mention your hacking conference, if that's still going.
Oh, yeah. It's called THOTCON. So it stands for 312 Con. And it's based out of Chicago. And we're actually not having it this year. We're going to do it next year. It will be our 13th year. And it's a lot of really great insights. That's THOTCON.org, THOTCON.org. And it's very educational. It's one of the most, I personally say it's my favorite conference, of course. But definitely check that out if you're any bit interested in tech.
Fantastic. And that's not affiliated to your company, or it is?
It's not. It's not, but my company does like to go there, and so we like to show our presence because we are invested in the community. So,
excellent. Thank you so much. Brilliant stuff. Thanks, and all the best to you in the future.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here and getting to speak with you. This has been great.
Cheers.
Cheers.